Bits and Bones, my name is Lady V, and welcome to my channel, where I talk about movies, books, and everything in between, and occasionally I talk about my journey as a writer/artist. A while ago, I read the anthology Local Haunts, which was a compilation of HorrorTube writers that gave to charity with all of the funds for the project, and I bought it strictly for that reason. I wasn't really expecting much of anything because I didn't know all of the writers personally, but it felt like a good way to get more into the HorrorTube and AuthorTube community, to learn about some more authors, some more writers out there that I'd like to connect with, or just to get more content from. So it seemed like a good overall thing to do, you know? But I didn't make a review for it on here, which is the logical thing to do, and so now I'm backpedaling, and I'm gonna do that now. Thanks. As someone that wants to submit more to anthologies and eventually publish my own anthologies of high and low quality depending on like what the theme is, I think that anthologies can either be like really fun and thematic, or they can be very serious and cutthroat. And I expected this one to fall a little bit farther on the fun side because, one, it is a whole bunch of people just writing horror stories based on, well, it's called Local Haunts, so it's supposed to be horror stories based on something kind of rural to them specifically, sort of a myth or a folklore, so they have a bit of a personal connection to it, and to expose more people to that certain story. So I was just generally really intrigued because, I mean, myths and folklore, yum yum yum. I was really excited to learn things that I hadn't already been aware of, like, at all. I wanted to be exposed to new cultures, and I'm sure that'll happen a bit more in the next one. I'm sure that they wanted to knock off a bit of the more general stories, and then they can get into really specific ones. I'd say roughly over half of them was kind of a monster, myth, or legend that I had at least some slight knowledge of already pre-existing before going into it, and then I could kind of attach what I already knew to the new story that I was reading. That said, that doesn't detract from the stories at all. It's the whole point of myths and folklore, is that they're a constant retelling and changing and getting the same story from different perspectives, through different writers, through different times, and that's how they kind of become eternal. That's why they're so interesting. So as I will find with anthologies going forward, I think because I haven't read a large amount of them that are a culmination of various writers, most of the anthologies that I've consumed have all been by one author, and it's just like Stephen King's short stories, you know? That said, even though I don't have a whole lot of experience in this field for what this is, and the fact that they expected to get no profit themselves for the writing, I think that it was pretty high quality for an anthology, and the consistency was definitely there. I enjoyed and genuinely wanted to keep reading from one story to the next in the entire anthology, which I think is actually pretty rare, especially in ones where you have a bunch of different writers in it. It's hard to get a flow or a sort of consistency. Usually there's like a couple standouts and a couple pretty dull ones, but you push through anyway because you want to get to the ones that you know you're going to find ones that you like. I just had a very genuinely fun time reading this. I don't want to make a terribly long video and go over each and every single story, although in the future, maybe if anybody's interested, I could do that with the anthologies that I read in the future. But for right now, I'm just going to highlight the ones that I liked the most, and just pick out the one thing that I thought was a little bit lacking. So the one thing that, as I mentioned a little bit previously, I found a little bit lacking was that some of the stories were a bit more general than I was expecting. I went into Local Haunts thinking like literally hometown, you're going to have something very specific and weird to say. It's going to be a weird story, a very specific ghost, a local legend. But a lot of them were pretty generalized, and like I said, something that I already had some sort of pre-existing knowledge of. More of like a different iteration of it closer to your hometown rather than something specific to like something you would only hear if you were in India or Nevada or like something. To kind of gloss over some of the ones and some of the nice points that I had about different ones, I'll just do a little boop, boop, boop. The only one I don't particularly have anything great to say about is The Gentleman by Ryan Stroud. I don't know why, I just feel like it wasn't actually technically a horror, let alone a local legend. It was very short, it was not quite on theme, and it just felt like an odd one out. A Stone's Throw by Dane Cobain gave me very Corpse Bride vibes, and that starting off the anthology was a good step in the right direction. It got me a little bit hooked, it got me feeling like I could kind kind of get my way in there, but also there were some things that I just probably didn't quite know yet, and I was interested to find out what I could learn. I liked the imagery in The Salt Hag by C.J. Wright. I felt like, well, I know, spoilers for the next 10 seconds, but I felt like it didn't quite adhere to the haunting rules of ghosts. I know ghosts don't really have rules, but the adventure that came to an end, I was kind of like, that's cheating. Crowthorn by Andrew Lyle was one of my favorites among the collection. It had very strong imagery. It was much more of a mystery than the other ones, where you're very certain that a dark or mysterious entity is going to make itself present, and that is a very real horror element thing. This one plays a lot more on psychological, and I really enjoyed that among the mix of all the paranormal entities. Mount Gilead by R. St. Clair was just really, like, the writing, I really enjoyed the writing, and I wanted it to be longer. I wanted more from it. In and of itself, it was perfectly fine. I just kind of want it to be expanded into a whole novel, and that's my problem. Drive Like Hell by Ken Poirier was a really fun ride. I know I'm not funny. Of all the stories in this anthology, I feel like Drive Like Hell was the most in time. I felt like the characters were in the most danger. It wasn't something that is being told or from the past. I am literally in the car with these people and we are driving like hell. The Mount of Death by Kevin David Anderson was one of the stories that stuck with me the most in terms of imagery. The creature and the description that he created is still in my head, and oh my god, I do not ever want to see that ever in my real life or death. Doesn't matter. He created a very grotesque, scary being, and I was slightly inclined to go look up more pictures of the different interpretations of the Mount of Death, but at the same time, I don't need those nightmares, thank you. The Drifter by James Flynn was a very interesting story among all of the other ones featured in the anthology because it kind of felt a bit more sci-fi horror, although it is within present day, and this is totally reasonable as a horror element in a modern myth. And what the Drifter really is, I really enjoyed that it felt a bit more like a different kind of horror subgenre. Sometimes monsters aren't always paranormal, sometimes they're a little bit sci-fi. Long Buried by E.D. Lewis had a little too real interactions between the characters in the story, which I really appreciated. It was one of those horrors where it's more about getting to know the characters and the relationships that they have and going through the interactions that they have that enhances it because you're more concerned for the fate of the characters. Darkness Descends by Jason White was one of the creature features that have still kind of stuck with me. I honestly don't know where the myth originally came from, but it's not a typical one, and that's really what I was looking for in this anthology. I wanted to find something that I was not familiar with, and this was definitely one of them. At the End of the Rope by Cameron Chaney was an extremely solid story. As much as the writer could have taken a backseat to all of the things that we kind of expect from certain things, for example, the trauma of a child who has lost a sibling, the relationship that they have with an abusive parent, and just how they deal with things that they found fantastical as a child, bringing it into an adult and understanding whether certain amounts of it are real, and if they are, what parts of it are good and which parts of it are very bad, was both interesting, well written, and I just really enjoyed going on that little ride with the character. And not to be biased, but my favorite among all of the short stories in the anthology, as I've said before, probably not on my channel, but in general, was Alone Among the Gum Trees by Cam Wolfe. Alone Among the Gum Trees was literally the epitome of exactly what I wanted and had expected from this anthology. It hit it right on the head because the myth or the lore, the creature, the superstitious entity, the evil force was very culture specific. Well, was very local. This was something that I did not know about, but knowing of the country itself and the environment which it provides, it makes complete sense that this is something that exists. And I looked it up afterwards and was like, yes, this is a creature. This is a creature that I am now completely terrified of, and I have one more reason never to go to Australia, because not only do they have extremely deadly, crazy real-life creatures, they have this myth too. And it sounds terrible. Alone Among the Gum Trees completely painted the specific environment of an Australia campout, the ambiance and the creepiness that goes along with that, which I have never personally experienced but could totally feel in the writing, and provided just enough of characters for me to care about them and want them to see how this plays out, but at the same time just completely enthralled to see and learn more about this creature. I don't want to say what the creature is in case you haven't read it, because that would completely spoil it. If you know that it's about Australia and you know about Australian myths, you probably already know what it is, but I didn't. It completely caught me off guard, and it, as my first introduction to this creature, I am thoroughly impressed and so glad to have experienced it for the first time this way. So yeah, that was my little review about the HorrorTube anthology Local Haunts. It was edited and put together by R. St. Clair, who also wrote Mount Gilead in the collection. I've heard that there's an announcement for a second in the anthology, and I am super excited to indulge in the next edition of Local Haunts. Assuming that it's called Local Haunts. It could be called something else, I'm not sure. But any HorrorTube anthology that will get me to know some of the community better, and which I can interact with, is something that is great. And since all the proceeds from this current Local Haunts edition goes to charity, I highly recommend getting it. Even if you're not a huge horror fan or an anthology fan, it's going to a good cause, and you're supporting small creators just in that little boost of confidence. Not to mention, these are just great little tidbits to read in 20-minute intervals now and then. Maybe pick it up once a month, have a little spook, and then set it back down and don't go back to it for a while. So anyway, that's the end of the video. If you enjoy my content, you can like and subscribe to my channel. If you would like to support me, I have my Patreon and my Buy Me a Coffee account linked in the description below. As always, just thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!